Community Coalition. Awesome. But I am Debbie from Aurora Behavioral Hospitals. We have 2 hospitals here in Arizona, one in Glendale and one in Tempe. We help adolescents and adults, so 12 and up, on an inpatient and then outpatient basis as well. We have a special needs unit in our Tempe hospital. I am always happy to connect you to one of the liaisons that's in your area if you would ever like to come take a tour. Personally, I love to give tours in Glendale's every other Friday when our horses are there for equine therapy in our outpatient department. So I love animals. Everybody that knows me knows I love animals. And so that's my favorite thing that we do. All right, I am going to bring up Rachel's slide now and introduce you to Rachel, who is with the Scottsdale Youth and Community Coalition. She's a therapist and co-owner of the Counseling Consultants, which is counseling services for kids, families, and adults in Scottsdale, Mesa, and throughout Arizona with telehealth services. Rachel is also the board chair of the Scottsdale Youth and Community Coalition, which is a group of mental health professionals dedicated to empowering the community in the areas of mental health, substance abuse, and eating disorders. If you practice in Scottsdale or in Scottsdale or are a parent of someone in Scottsdale, please reach out. You can reach out to Rachel or myself. We would love to get you connected with the counseling consultants. And I am going to go ahead and stop sharing so Matthew can share and hand it to Rachel so that she can introduce Matt. So thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Rachel Rubenstein. I just wanted to add in 2 things about the Scottsdale Youth and Community Coalition, that we have monthly professional meetings virtually that you are welcome to join. If you're interested, you can put that in the chat and I'll add you to our list. And then we, of course, collaborate with Aurora quarterly for these awesome CEUs. And we're going to get started on one right now with Matt. Matt Rosenkind is a licensed professional counselor with over 10 years of experience in the mental health field. As the chief financial officer and clinical director of Dynamis Counseling, Matt has dedicated his career to raising awareness and preventing suicide. His journey into counseling was driven by a deep commitment to suicide prevention, and he has made it his mission to decrease stigma and increase understanding around this critical issue. Through his leadership and therapeutic work, Matt strives to create a supportive environment where individuals feel empowered to seek help and find hope. And he is a dynamic person himself with all kinds of amazing projects, and he is really a stellar human being. So Matt, let me say one more bit of housekeeping. If you'll put questions in the Q&A, that makes it a little easier for us to manage questions. If there's something, if there's a question that you have, we'll try and answer it at the time or at the end, depending on where we are in the presentation. You can put comments in the chat, but questions in the Q&A. And now I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate you. Good to see you. And Debbie, thank you so much. Thank you both for having me. I do look forward to discussing a little bit more about suicide awareness and prevention. Again, as they said, my name is Matt Rosenkind. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I hope that we can have a candid discussion about suicide awareness and prevention today. Love Semicolon was created in 2010. I started my journey in mental health, and that was when I discovered my passion for this idea that we need to love our story and that it's not over. And so I think just spreading a message of hope is really important to me, and it's been central to my life and to my practice. And so it fills me with so much meaning and so much purpose to be able to share this information. I'm hopeful that is informative, certainly always open to questions that you all have. I certainly appreciate each of you being here today. So we'll just sort of jump into it. As you have questions, please feel free to jump in and let me know. Again, about me, my name is Matt, and I live in Gilbert, Arizona. Our practice is here in Mesa, Arizona. We have 5 therapists on our team. Dynamics counseling has been around about 2 years. I had a practice previous to this. And the history of Love Semicolon, it really came about because we were noticing that there wasn't a lot of education information going out that's really sort of grace-based and heart-centered information about the issue of suicide awareness and prevention. And so that's sort of the function of this. It's had several different adaptations. Today's adaptation is intended to be super informational, but also I'm hopeful that we can make it engaging and fun as well. I know it is a heavier subject, so please make sure that you are taking care of yourself. If you're triggered at any point during the discussion, please feel free to excuse yourself and engage in self-care. Our hopeful objectives today are to understand the scope of suicide, identify risk factors and warning signs, learn how to talk about suicide. Go ahead.
Sorry, Matt, super quick. It's not sharing your PowerPoint. Or at least not that I can see.
That's not fun.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
We literally like tested it and everything.
I know. And when I go into presentation mode, it doesn't let me see the screen. So I didn't even see it. So let's see. It will let me go to share screen. Let's try this.
Yay.
Yeah,
There we
there
are.
it is. And it's
All
in
right.
the, if you hit presentate, it's in the like one where we can see all your slides to the side of it. I don't know what that means, but just so you know.
Yeah, so I will go back to maybe. There we go. Everybody see that?
Yes, it's perfect.
Yay, perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Yay. Of course. Sorry about that. All right, cool. So objectives today, things that we'll be learning about are talking about suicide, learning how to communicate about a very difficult, challenging topic, assessing risk, interventions, legal and ethical considerations, resources and support, recovery and resilience, building supportive environments, evaluate and improve, and lastly, and most fun is Q&A. So again, open to questions throughout. If there's topical questions that come up during, Rachel can let me know and we can get those questions discussed among us. All right, so understanding the scope of suicide. So when I started going out to the Out of the Darkness walk, it was amazing to me how many different people were there and the different families, businesses, individuals that were touched by the issue of suicide. And one of the things I learned when I was coming in to be a counselor for the function of suicide awareness and prevention is I found that a lot of people, unless they've been touched by it, it's kind of like a highly stigmatized thing, so we don't talk about it. And so I think understanding the prevalence of suicide is super important. And so there's some alarming statistics around suicide. One is, I don't think we think about young people in this way, but it is the second leading cause of death in 15 to 29-year-olds. And so these people, maybe it's mental health concerns, maybe it's substance abuse issues, social issues. I think in today's landscape, you know, bullying used to be sort of contained to the campuses of schools, but now with the social media expansion and all of that, I think bullying can go to cyberbullying and things like that, which have had negative impacts on suicide attempts and suicide completions. And so very surprising to learn that, and it's second only to accidental death. And so it is important that we know that for every suicide, there is many more that people who attempt suicide that don't complete suicide. And so the estimates are that there's about 20 million attempted suicides globally every year. And so this has a huge impact on individuals, families, and communities. The emotional impact this has on people, it creates distress, think for I found that
Matt,
say their name.
we're having a little issue with your connectivity, with your internet.
Okay.
Not sure how to handle that either. You're just a little choppy there.
Okay. Are we back?
You sound great.
Okay. Let me try to get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so yeah, it has a big impact on individuals. I find that individuals don't want to necessarily talk about it, they don't want to share it. It feels like when we've lost a loved one to suicide, or if we've attempted suicide ourselves, that it sort of becomes like a scarlet letter. It's something that we want to keep hidden in the shadows. And I think we need to encourage people that we need to talk about this thing. We need to have informed dialogue about suicide awareness, that it is a cause of death, but it is no less of a cause of death than any other factor. And so it's important that we learn how to have conversations, which we'll get into more later on in the presentation today. Suicidal ideation often stems from depression, mental health concerns, overwhelming life circumstances. But it's also important that we realize that these aren't the only factors that sort of impact an individual's decision to die by suicide. There was a story several years back, and it was about this sports reporter, and the sports reporter was 60 years old, and he held this belief that life ended at 60. And so he ended up dying by suicide at the age of 60 because his belief was that quality of life after 60 was not going to be something that he wanted to participate in. And so I think that enhances even further that we need to have conversations about what are people's belief about life, and have conversations about people's future orientation, and not just saying, oh, when we see the signs and symptoms of severe depression or underlying mental health concerns or overwhelming life circumstances, then we talk about this thing. I think it's something that as individuals, as families, and as communities that we talk about regularly. Families that have experienced this suffer from trauma, and when they've lost a loved one to suicide. So it's important that they have feelings also of maybe some guilt, shame, and feeling some judgment on their family after they've lost a loved one or have had a loved one attempt suicide. So it's important that we provide support, wrap around social networks, and we'll get into more supportive communities as we go on. But communities as a collective, I think we can come together to really help wrap people up in knowing that they are supported, that they are heard. We can work on validating them. And so that's a big deal when somebody has suffered a loss to suicide, or are supporting people who have lost. And so I think it's important that we learn to talk about this in a way that we can suck out the guilt, shame, and judgment. So social factors are a big factor. Age is a big factor. And so 15 to 29, there's higher risk. 45 to 54, midlife crises come in. 75 plus, isolation, starting to lose loved ones. And so those age factors are important to know. It's also gender is important to understand. And so it's explained that men are more likely to die by suicide, while women are more likely to attempt suicide. At least that's what the studies represent. And then understanding the impact of ethnicity and culture on suicidal ideation and completion. Oftentimes, minority stressors can be and have an impact, a direct impact on suicide rates within certain ethnic groups. And so there's also the LGBTQI plus community. It's been said that Native American and Alaska Native populations suffer with this greatly. Across every spectrum, we notice that there's varying degrees of risk. And so I think we need to work together to identify risks and warning signs. And so risk factors are defined as ongoing or chronic aspects of one's life that can make them vulnerable to suicide. but do not necessarily indicate that a suicide attempt is imminent. And so again, this is just risk factors alone. This is not a warning sign. This is just saying that they have risk factors. Risk factors are things like mental health disorders, substance abuse concerns, a history of trauma and abuse, chronic illness or pain, or a family history of suicide. And so those are sort of some examples of some risk factors which are different from what we're going to talk about next, which is warning signs.
Quick question. Someone wanted you to repeat the statistics for the midlife crisis grouping of.
Yes, and so these are the age categories that were sort of broken down into terms of the highest risk for suicide. And so 15 to 29 is a high risk population. 45 to 54 is a high risk population due to midlife crisis, financial constraints and challenges. And then 75 plus was due to isolation, starting to lose loved ones, things of that nature.
Thank you.
Of course. Warning signs. So the warning signs are defined as immediate acute indicators that a person may actively be considering or planning suicide. This requires our urgent attention and intervention. And so warning signs are things if we have a client that comes in and says, hey, I am having suicidal thoughts today and I have plans and intentions. Those verbal statements, also statements like, I wish I were dead. This world would be better off without me. My family would be better off without me. And so it's important that we pay attention and we tune in to what people are saying. And then behavioral changes are another cue that we can notice in terms of warning signs. Noticeable changes in behaviors, such as like they were really high last week and then they come in this week and they're super low in their affect. People start giving away their possessions, giving away things that used to have immense value to them, stop participating in things that once used to bring them joy, increased use of alcohol or drugs, and unusual mood swings. And so I think whether it's high to low or low to high, I think any shift in behavior is something important for us to note, as those can be warning signs of suicidal ideation. So situational warning signs. And so if we have someone that's going through a divorce, a major life event, financial difficulty, death of a loved one, job loss, and certainly financial crisis, all those play a role in our situational warning signs where we need to ask more questions about what that person's experiencing so we can make sure that we're working to help them avoid and become aware if they are having suicidal awareness, suicidal thoughts. We can work with them on how to keep them safe and provide supports. So that leads us into developing communication skills. Communication skills are really important. This is probably the most intensive part of the topic because learning how to talk about this thing is essential. So we need to approach this topic with extraordinary sensitivity. And so we have to make sure that we're approaching a person in the right time and place, obviously in the four walls of a counseling center. Obviously that is a space that would be appropriate, but finding a private, quiet setting where the person feels safe and comfortable in sharing and disclosing some really, really tough information. And we have the honor of being able to sit with somebody on a really, really challenging day. And through that, we have the opportunity to really express genuine concern, that we're not just glossing over this person's hardship or glossing over and validating this person's thoughts. And it's important that we really get into a genuine concern and are present. I think one of the ways that we do that is through the use of open-ended questions. And so not things that require yes or no answers, but things that go a little bit more in depth. Asking questions like, can you tell me more about what you're going through? Or can you tell me more about how you've been feeling lately? Can you tell me more about these specific thoughts that you've been having? Something that's going to open up dialogue, something that is going to help them be able to identify sort of the root or the core issue that is happening. And so we can identify a path forward to help keep that person safe and help them feel supported. Super, super important. And then the other thing is sometimes we say things that are intended to be supportive, that are intended in love. And I think sometimes some of the things that are commonly said actually extend more issues around guilt, shame, and judgment. And so really important that we're not saying things like, how can you do that? Do you know how devastated I'd be if you died by suicide? Do you know how much it would hurt? Do you know that other people are suffering more than you are? How dare you think about something like that? And so these are the types of comments, somebody that is in this space where they're already having these suicidal thoughts, they don't need any assistance with any additional guilt, shame, or judgment. So it's really, really important that we make sure that the questions that we're asking and any commentary that we might have is avoiding these things. And so again, the heart of it may not be to add guilt, shame, or judgment. The heart of it may be to let that person know how loved they are. But saying, don't you know how devastated I am, sort of is making that about us. We really need to make that time about them. While that is true, that we would be devastated if we lost that person to suicide, we really need to make that time about them and about how we can be supportive of them, acknowledge their feelings, and validate what they're going through. So important to say things like, it sounds like you're dealing with a lot right now, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. And I think that sometimes it's just that, like, it's okay not to be okay. And I know at the beginning of my career, I was really opposed to that. I was like, no, we have to really make everybody okay, and we need to do that right now. And my belief was that I had to be the hero in that story. And what I realized through reading a book called The Heroic Client was that I'm not the hero in anybody's story, that they're the hero in their story. And so if we can work to sort of avoid minimizing their experiences and also minimizing our dialogue, that's rooted in our beliefs. So we're super client-centered or person-centered. That's super, super important to do. And so we can't downplay it like, oh, things will get better, or some people have it worse, or everybody feels that way sometimes. Instead, we need to really focus our attention on acknowledging their pain and letting them know that they are seen and that they are heard. So additionally, it's important that we are direct. And so we can't say things like, are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself? Because hurting yourself is different than ending your life. And so we need to be direct in what we are sharing with people. So if we have a direct question, like, are you having any thoughts of suicide? And if so, do you have any plans or intentions of dying by suicide? And so really, really important that we're direct, because we have to make the disparity between hurting oneself and dying by suicide. And we have to be gentle on the way that we support them. And so we have to offer support without high pressure. And so saying things like, I'm here for you, I want to help you get through this. How can I support you? We also, I think it was my inclination really early in my career, and sometimes still my inclination, I want to give advice quickly. And so sometimes we end up giving advice too soon before they finished sharing. And so they say that listening isn't listening if we are formulating our response before the other person has finished talking. And so really, really important that we let them get all the way through their stream of thought before we interrupt and start giving advice. There is a time for a solution, but while they're talking and while they're sharing, if we interrupt too soon, we could interrupt that process and decrease someone's likelihood of being open, honest, and transparent with their experiences. So super important to offer that support, but doing so in a way that is not filled with pressure. All right, so developing communication skills. And so one of the things that we talk about often is showing empathy using body language. And I think that sometimes we don't have a very open body posture, or maybe we're not maintaining eye contact. Sometimes these super sensitive conversations around suicide, self-harm, anything Mental health related can be challenging. And so because we're uncomfortable, we divert our eyes to something else. And so really important in these scenarios, eye contact is our number one source of connection, that we're able to look them in the eyes, that we're able to maintain open body posture. We don't have our arms folded while we're talking to them, that we're just open. And so we can really hear from them and demonstrate to them. Nonverbal communication is about 70% of what we're saying. And so if we are looking disengaged with our body language and with our eyes, that can really say a lot to somebody that's hurting, and it may cause them to not want to share as openly as they would if we maintain positive use of our body language. Using reflective listening, this is a really essential skill. And so paraphrasing back what we heard somebody say. So if I said, hey, the sky is blue, and somebody's like, oh, Matt, what I heard you say is that the sky is black. And I said, no, 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 no. What I meant to say was that the sky was blue. And so really, really important that we go back. I don't know if any of you have ever played the game of telephone, but in that game, at the beginning, there's a very clear message. And by the end, the message is all jumbled. And so reflective listening helps us avoid that pitfall. And so sometimes we can just exist with people as well. We can use reflective listening, and then maybe all we need to do in that moment is just exist with them. Ask them like, hey, I would just like to sit here with you, and we can be silent, we can be still if that's most beneficial, but just letting them know that we want to be present with them and be there for them through their struggle. Super important. And then we need to summarize what we heard them say, and then we need to validate what they said. And so I like to default to two main questions without a bunch of add-ons. So what do you need is one, and then how can I help is another. And so what do you need? We don't need to add on what do you need in order to feel better, or how can I help you feel better? It's like, what do you need and how can I help? And maybe they know and maybe they don't know, and that's okay. If they don't know, we can sit with them. If they do know, then we can support them. So either way, we're being supported just in different ways. And then also giving them a solution, offering solutions immediately. So first we focus in on listening before suggesting the solutions again. And then we don't jump right into advice. We listen fully, make sure that we're seeking first to understand. Shakespeare said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so I think that's really important in these key moments. Sometimes simply being heard, simply being seen is the most powerful thing that a person can experience in that moment. You can really be that change in somebody's life. You can be the difference of somebody maybe dying or not dying by suicide simply by being a supportive individual. There was this morning I went to Circle K, and normally I'm really time centric and I want to make sure that I get where I'm going on time, and 15 minutes early is late for me. And this morning I decided to stop and just sort of smell the roses. And I decided to stop, and I held this door open for this lady, this elderly lady, and it seemed like it was 5 minutes, but it was probably more like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And this lady stopped, pivoted in front of me, turned up to me, and with eyes streaming down her cheek, she said, I didn't think anyone could see me anymore. And it turned out her story was that her husband had died the year before, and she didn't have any family. She was the last living family member in her entire family unit. And so really important that she wasn't feeling seen and she wasn't feeling heard. And I don't know if she was what she was going through or what her plans were, but I do know that it meant a lot to her just that somebody saw her. And so simply how we interact and we communicate in our day-to-day lives can really affect change in people's lives. And so again, asking what they need, offering those solutions. Again, based upon what they say, our solutions might vary, especially as clinicians or case managers or whatever our role might be. Our primary goal is to make sure that that person is safe. And so whether it's us spending time with them or whether it is a call to one of our resources, but we need to offer some sort of solution immediately so that they know we're trying to help them and work them in the direction that they need to go. All right. And so next segment is really all about assessing risk. And so understanding the purpose of risk assessment. I remember early on in my career, we were introduced to some risk assessment tools, and I was pretty resistant to the tools. But I think once I started to understand the function of the tools and ways to deliver it in a really person-centered, heart-centered way, I think I became a lot more comfortable with assessing risk and having conversations and being relational with people that are having a tough day. And so the function of an assessment tool is really to identify at-risk individuals, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And so maybe they're saying something, or maybe there's been a dramatic change in behavior or dramatic change in their situational circumstances. And so the function of an assessment is really to identify those people that are at risk and then have a standardized approach to increase consistency. And so we see this a lot based upon who comes out, based upon which organization comes out for crisis intervention. I'm noticing that the safety planning of things are not standardized. We're not getting the same thing from crisis team to crisis team. And so there's a few tools that do standardize the different approaches as we work into safety planning, which we'll talk about here shortly. One is the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. And so this again is a really formal tool. It's a little bit longer of a tool, but it is a tool that provides scoring. And so sometimes if we're feeling like we're having a hard time being objective, these tools can really come alongside of us and support us in making a decision based upon the severity rating. It doesn't mean that we have to deliver it in a cold manner. It just means that we can ask the questions that are going to help us engage in a rating scale so we can better understand what risk are we currently looking at. Some of the other really common ones are the PHQ-9. I know at my practice, we send this out with every single intake packet that goes out, super important. The Beck scale for suicidal ideation is also another great tool. You guys can find these things online. It's really important that we have access to these tools. If you're using an electronic health record, that we upload or get these questions into and the rating scales into our EHRs so that we can have the tool at our fingertips at all times. And then also remembering that with some of these tools and such, that we have to remember that there are certain cultural considerations that we have to bear in mind at all times. And so remembering that everybody comes from a different place and everybody comes from a different background. And so remembering that cultural humility is super important in these interventions and in engaging in assessment. This was always really uncomfortable for me. I don't know about for each of you, but role playing was never the most comfortable thing that I did in my career. But I remember really early on in my career that role playing played a vital role in me learning how to engage with people that were having a tough day, especially when I was a crisis interventionist. Being able to go out and role play with people that had been doing that work for years was really, really important. And so, but the function of role playing is to teach us how to combine the tools and clinical judgment with being person-centered, with connecting with people on a human level. And so remembering that all of these things are more than just tools. This is a human being and this is a life. It's more than just a score. This is continuous monitoring, continuous touching base with this person to make sure that we're assessing risk on an ongoing basis. So one of the questions I had early in my career was like, I don't really know, like without these tools, I don't really know what is low risk, what is moderate risk, what is high risk, and what should I do? Should those things come across my office. And so we're going to get into defining risk levels, low, moderate, and high. And so what to do with low risk. With low risk, we provide support and monitoring. We're still going to ask the questions. We're still going to do the work. We're still going to encourage them to engage in treatment. And we're still going to create a safety plan. Even if somebody is a low risk, we still want to make sure that we have a safe plan forward. And so regardless of what risk level, it's always safety plan, safety plan, safety plan. Moderate risk, we want to increase monitoring and support. And so we want to offer a direct referral to a mental health professional. And we want to maybe get involved with a crisis team. So that's maybe calling, depending on where you live. Here it's Solari, it's 988. 988 is nationwide. But we want to make sure that we're really engaged in crisis intervention at the moderate risk level. Now, higher risk levels, we need immediate intervention. There is, do not pass go, do not collect $200. It is immediate, straight to intervention. A mental health professional, if we're a case manager or a natural support, we want to make sure that we get a mental health professional involved immediately. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to keep that person safe. So we need to remove access to lethal means. Important to know that lethal means are expansive. And so this could look like an abundance of medications at their disposal, access to firearms, sharps can be another one. And so we need to make sure that we remove all access to means with that individual, and that person needs somebody to stay with them, direct line of sight at all times until we get them the proper care that they need. And so really, really important with high risk situations that, again, we are taking immediate action and that our safety plan is locked in and executed in those high risk situations. I know this is not our favorite topic, but it's really important in assessing risk and just this field in general that we document everything. Documenting our encounters with our clients and with people is essential. It's essential for planning. It's essential for follow-up. It's essential so we remember the steps and also remember the progress that they've made as they go through the treatment process. We need to encourage consistency in treatment engagement. And then again, we need to create a safety plan. And so I wanted to go over a safety plan really briefly on this topic because I do notice some inconsistency based upon the people that come out for crisis intervention. So whether it's from our offices or whether we do in community work, whether we're in hospitals or whether we're in somebody's home, wherever we're doing the work, it's important that we create a safety plan. And so number one, like we talked about earlier, is identifying warning signs. This also helps us identify that maybe they have a level of self-awareness when their warning signs are present. So we want to be very specific in terms of what the warning signs are. So if there's a natural support, a peer support person that's going to come alongside of them, that way they are aware of specifically what to look for in a person that needs a safety plan. And then internal coping strategies, what are the things that help them help themselves? And so for some people, it's drawing. For some people, it's listening to music. For some people, it's meditation or prayer. For some people, it's physical activity, going to the gym, going for a walk around the block, things that they can do that exist within their internal locus of control. That's important that we identify those strategies. And then social contacts, places for distraction. So maybe they like Starbucks, or maybe they like to go to the park, or maybe they like to go to a friend's house, or having a meeting up with friends or acquaintances. And then identifying people they can ask for help. In this part of the safety plan, it's important that we're really specific and that we understand the nature of that relationship and that we list the actual contact information on the safety plan. When somebody is struggling with their thoughts, I think remembering exactly who they said they were going to call and the number they were going to call, I think sometimes that's hard, even though now we have these handy little devices at our fingertips. I think sometimes having it written so we can just follow step by step, it removes barriers by having the information specifically outlined on the safety plan. And then having professional and emergency contacts on there. So mental health professionals, the crisis hotlines. You look in their demographic for the closest hospital or emergency department. Super important. And then lastly, making the environment safe, removing those means for suicide, whether that's sharps, whether that's prescription pills, firearms, whatever it may be. We also want to make sure that we identify some protective factors. And so protective factors would be what makes their life worth living. Maybe it's their loved ones, maybe it's some future goal they're working on hitting or a belief that they might have, something that brings them joy or fulfillment. We just want to make sure that we're able, through the safety planning process, to get some sort of buy-in from the person. And so not that we're just saying, hey, this is what I'm telling you to do. It's like, hey, what are some things that we can do? And using that inclusive language in safety planning, I think is super helpful, because then we get their buy-in and reduce some of those barriers. By simply following the steps of crisis intervention and safety planning, improves our outcomes dramatically. The more consistent we are, the better the outcomes are. So effective intervention strategies is next. And so with effective interventions, there's several. And so crisis intervention training, or crisis intervention is really important. This is where mobile teams will come out, or we'll call 988, or use the text to chat line. Any of those things are crisis intervention tools that we can use. Safety planning, again, super effective strategy. It gives them something physical, something tangible. They don't have to think about it. They just follow the steps. And so really, really important. Next is gatekeeper training. So gatekeeper training, as an example, one gatekeeper training would be like the assist model. The assist model is a really effective strategy. And so we'll get a little bit more into that shortly, but engaging in some sort of gatekeeper training is super helpful, and from an intervention perspective. There's CBT and DBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy. There's medication management. I know as a therapist, I always love it when I have a psychiatrist on the care team. And so super important that if they need that level of support, that's often an effective intervention for managing suicidal thoughts. There's peer support. And so a lot of organizations have peer support teams. And so people that are maybe higher acuity can have a peer support person, somebody that just like goes through life with them, goes to the grocery store with them, does some of the things that feel overwhelming with them. And then making sure that people have natural supports, that we're identifying natural supports. And if they don't have natural supports, that we're working with them to help identify ways that they can collect natural supports. People that just aren't only professional in nature. And so whether we're a counselor or case manager, our function is really more professional support. So making sure that they have all the supports so they feel like they have complete wraparound care. And then awareness, it's our awareness, it's creating awareness in the community, it's creating awareness in the people themselves, and then engaging in prevention strategies and following up. And so I think there's been more and more dialogue around suicide awareness and prevention as time has gone on, through whether it's NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or whether it is AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I think these things have gone up dramatically, but I think we can continue to grow and do better in this regard. This is like the least fun part, I think, maybe of the information, but there are legal and ethical questions to consider when we are talking about suicide awareness and prevention. As clinicians, we definitely have some rules and some obligations that we have to follow. So important from a confidentiality perspective. If you've ever done an intake or you've talked to somebody, they want to know, and they want to make sure that their information is secured and protected. So it is a foundational principle, not only just from a HIPAA perspective, but also from a rapport building and relational perspective. A quick way to breach trust and rapport with another human being is by breaching their confidentiality without regard to the limits of confidentiality, of course. The limits of confidentiality are, of course, if they're a danger to themselves or a danger to others, there's limits. And so if they are a danger to themselves, we are mandated reporters. As a mandated reporter, we have to do something if they do report that they're a danger to themselves or a danger to others. All of this information should be found and available to a client in their informed consent. And so they understand the limits to confidentiality, and they understand that we do have a duty to warn and protect, a duty to warn if there's somebody else that's in danger, and a duty to protect the individual that's having suicidal ideation in the event that they report that they're struggling with their thoughts. So real quick tie back to ASSIST. The acronym ASSIST, it's ASIST. It stands for acknowledge, support, screen, intervene, secure, and transfer. And so this model, there is a whole training on this model. I would strongly encourage anyone who has not gone through the ASSIST training to go through it. Even if it isn't your only go-to that you have, it's really, really, really helpful in terms of understanding how to walk through a really difficult conversation with a person. And so I'd highly recommend that as a side note. Again, we do have a legal obligation to make sure that people are protected, and that we have a duty to take action if somebody is threatening themselves or threatening others. There was the Tarasoff ruling. It was Tarasoff versus Regents in the University of California case. This is what established the duty to warn and the duty to protect. And so if you ever need to reference back where this comes through, that is where it comes from. Yes.
Matt, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
We had a question about how to access the ASSIST training, if you knew of an organization or a link for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I will. I'll provide that at the end of the training. Okay. All right. So, great question though. I'm super happy to provide that information. I think it's really important. It was really helpful in my career for sure. Balancing legal and ethical dilemmas. And so sometimes, again, it can make it difficult to maintain trust when we tell a client like, hey, we have a duty to warn or a duty to protect in this situation. And so it's really important that we let them know that the heart of that is really us just wanting to make sure that they stay safe. And sometimes we'll find that people will deflect in this situation. No, I didn't mean it. I wasn't being intentional when I said that. But it's really, we still have an ethical obligation. If somebody reported that they had ideation, plan, and intention of dying by suicide or harming another person, we have a legal obligation, an ethical obligation to do something with that information. And then documentation again, it's important that our documentation is accurate. Again, whether if we ever get called into mental health court or anything like that, we got to make sure that what we are documenting is accurate and thorough. And we have to make sure that we're clear in documenting why it was appropriate to break confidentiality if confidentiality was indeed broken. And then the steps taken to warn or protect. And so if you're calling a specific individual or if you are calling 911, we have to document what steps we took to do that and then the follow-up actions that we took. And so important that within every client's chart that documentation is present and accounted for in every situation. And so legal protection for us, I know for myself in private practice, this is super important. And I know for businesses and community health, behavioral health centers, it's important as well. But making sure that we have proper documentation. So it provides legal protection for the professional. So if you have your professional liability insurance or insurance for your business, we want to make sure that we are protected. And so we're acting in accordance with the law and also within our ethical obligations and standards of care. So super important from legal and ethical considerations perspective. This next one, as a crisis interventionist, I dealt with this very frequently, and it is very uncomfortable conversations to have when we have to face something like a petition or an involuntary hospitalization. This is considered when somebody has made some threats on their life or on the life of someone else. Now we have to take some action. And if they're not willing to go to treatment voluntarily, sometimes they can be involuntarily hospitalized. There's also this word out there called committed. I don't prefer that word, but I think involuntary hospitalization covers it. We got to make sure that legal standards are met. And so making sure that there is documented evidence to support that there is a mental health condition of record and that they are of significant risk or harm to themselves or to others that is necessary that the hospitalization is necessary to prevent that kind of harm. Within ethical considerations, it's really important that we get into autonomy versus safety. And so one of the things I ran into often as a crisis interventionist is like, it's my life, it's my decision. You don't get to say, you don't get to tell me what to do. And while I hear that and while I understand how hard that is, there's a point where it is no longer an option for somebody to go to treatment if they are in imminent danger to themselves or to other people. It is a safety first perspective. And so that is the heart of it. I know saying that to someone that is at the top of their emotional ladder, that's really, really tough to hear. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is really minimize the trauma that may come from those events associated with the reasons why somebody might be hospitalized. So there are processes and procedures that we have to follow. I think it's really, really important to humanize this part. I remember at the beginning of my tenure as a crisis interventionist, I saw some approaches that I didn't feel were incredibly humanized, and I felt honored when I was able to go in and do those interventions, to be able to meet them with compassion and with grace, while also following the legal and ethical considerations that we have. And so I think it's important to meet that person from a compassion perspective, even though we're saying, hey, you have to go to treatment at this point. It's not a voluntary choice. You have the opportunity to say it's voluntary and to go voluntarily, but law enforcement, mental health courts might have to get involved. Petitions might have to be done in the event that you are not willing to seek out treatment of your own. COT can oftentimes last up to 1 year or greater. And so important that we just inform them on like, hey, this is what it looks like if we go voluntary, and this is what it looks like should we decide to go of our own free will. And so post-hospitalization considerations, it's important for discharge planning be done. So we're not just like, all right, you did your 72-hour observation, you're free. We need a plan, just like we need a safety plan, we need a discharge plan. So really important that discharge planning is done. Really important that I think post-hospitalization, I think people come out with that same idea that we talked about earlier, which is the stigma of mental health, the stigma of being hospitalized for a suicide attempt or suicidal ideation with plan and intent. And so I think it's important that we address the stigma and we talk about their confidentiality. We talk about the impact of their story, and that we make sure that they understand from an informed consent perspective what post-hospitalization will look like and ongoing care might look like. Obviously, that would look different if they were court ordered versus having gone voluntary, but I think the steps remain the same. From a legal liability perspective, it's really important to know that if we fail to act when we have a duty to warn or a duty to protect, we could be liable. And that liable could mean civil penalties, it could mean fines, it can lead to a lot of different consequences that we don't like. It can cost us our license if we're found to be negligent and not engaging in our ethical and legal obligations. So really, really important. Also, the other important part of documenting is this last one, which is wrongful commitment. And so if we wrongfully hospitalize someone without sufficient justification, this can lead to actions, legal actions for false imprisonment or violation of their rights. And so it's important, whatever our justifications were, when we're in that risk assessment phase, that we're really dialed in terms of our documentation on that. Really, really important stuff. So resources and support systems, there's all kinds now. I love 988. I think it's been such an awesome ad rather than just the 1-800 number. But 988, again, this is a call or a text number. And so I think this is awesome. The talk line also still exists. These options are available 24/7. There's the crisis text line, there's the veterans crisis line. There's local mental health services, so we can always be researching community mental health centers. There's organizations like this that host these types of trainings and webinars. We can connect with them. Everybody in this room is potentially a resource for each other, and so really leaning on each other as supports and identifying what each of us are doing. What hospitals are we connected with? Local emergency rooms, mobile crisis teams. Sharing our experiences is important. Then there's NAMI and there's AFSP and telehealth services. I think we can thank COVID for the telehealth services. I think it has decreased some barriers for people that struggle with transportation. And so whether it is a private practice or a community behavioral health center or another online telehealth provider, it's really, really cool that we have that as a resource and a support now. There's also support groups. There's online support groups. There's peer support groups, and there's also survivor support groups. This is survivors not just from a survivor, meaning they've lost somebody, but they're a survivor of a suicide attempt, or if they're a loved one of somebody who's attempted to die by suicide. So really, really important that we know what the resources are, and remembering, I know this was challenging for me at the beginning of my career, but remembering that we don't always have to be the resource. We can just be resourceful for the people that we come into contact with. And so important that we know how to assess needs. And so assessing needs, understanding the needs and identifying barriers. And so again, barriers, it can be anything. It can just be their resistance to go. It can be like, oh, I got to work in the morning. It can be really anything. And so making sure that we fully understand their needs and we are working to overcome those barriers in real time. And so it could be a financial thing, again, transportation. I'm worried about the stigma or what people might think. We can ease some of those concerns with the steps that we take to sort of reduce the stigma and some of the ways that we just have talked about this thing over the course of our time with this person. So really important. We need to, again, provide very clear and actionable information. We have to make this step by step. There's no thinking involved. You just do step 1, then 2, and then 3. So really important that we do that. We make it clear and actionable. Sometimes this means a warm handoff, meaning that we're going to get on the phone and we're going to gently hand them off to 988, or we're going to gently hand them off to another support or another therapist or whatever, but whatever warm handouts you can offer that sort of remove barriers and resistance to seek care, I think is super important. Follow-up and ongoing support. Rachel, do you have something?
Yeah, someone, this is a really interesting question. Someone asked how they could get a copy of the crisis script at 988 or 741 to help explain it to clients.
The crisis script.
Yeah.
That is a great question.
I know what I do is I just call them myself and
Yeah,
like,
I think that, I mean, that's a really, really good question. I don't know if they provide their script. I mean, I certainly have some scripts that I use in crisis intervention. And so, but I can look that up and see if they make that available, and I can reach out to my resources and certainly follow up on that. That is a great question. So I will look into that and follow up on that. That's a great question. Again, really important that we follow up and provide ongoing support. This is a process. This is not just a one and done type thing. So we need to check in regularly. If these are our clients, we need to call. We need to set those check-ins. We need to adjust our guidance as needed, meaning that if they originally presented as low risk, and they could go to high risk, they could go to moderate risk. And so sometimes we need to adjust our guidance. It's not always just because they were once low risk, they'll always be low risk. They could be mobile and move to any other risk level. So it's important that we adjust that guidance as we need to. There's mobile crisis teams. I know I've had mobile crisis teams out to my office, and Again, it's really nice to have that level of support. Again, if we're calling out a mobile crisis, it's important that we stay on scene, that we stay present with the client during that time, specifically if they are a moderate to high risk. So mobile crisis teams are there though, and those numbers and that information will be made available as well. Empower. So we want to make sure that we empower these people. Sometimes it feels like if we're threatening somebody, or I say that lightly, but if we're telling somebody that they're going to have to go into a hospital, sometimes they feel disempowered, and we really want to say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to advocate for your needs, to talk about what's been going on with you, to advocate for what you need in your life, and really do this sort of wants, needs inventory for your life. To be able to self-advocate both inside the hospital and outside the hospital, if that is what is needed. And then building confidence in the resources. I think this speaks to the question that was just asked, like, what can I expect when I get on the phone with 988? What questions can I expect? So that's a really good resource that we can learn about together. And then leveraging community resources. Again, we are the community, and so together we can. I think it's important that we tackle this conversation together. All of our minds and thoughts and ideas together are more powerful than just one of our thoughts or one of our ideas. And so really important that we leverage that in these engagements, that we get community involvement. And so they do things like I talked about it earlier, the Out of Darkness Walk. There's advocacy groups, organizations, recreational programs that promote mental wellness. And so I think it's really important that we get involved from a community level. And then collaborative care is really, really important. And so I know we partner with a psychiatrist, and that's invaluable to us because we can go to that person to talk about challenging issues for collaboration and for just a person at a higher level that can provide additional support and resources for us as a practice. So I'd certainly encourage that collaboration. And then ultimately we need to promote recovery and resilience. Post-vention, kind of interesting word, but this is just what we do after the intervention. And so that's the support, the care provided after an attempt or a completion. So obviously after an attempt, it's that person and the loved ones of that person. And so, or after a completion, it's the loved ones of those people and next steps, providing crisis response and counseling support, peer support, natural supports, making sure that all that is on board post-vention, and that it must be timely and sensitive. And so this is a really difficult time in people's lives, whether it's that they've just attempted or that there's been a completion. It's important that we are timely and sensitive in that area. So making sure that we understand that the function of post-vention is making sure that the follow-up and follow-through is there, that the survivors have support, they have access to immediate care, they can safety plan themselves, or we can safety plan for them. Ongoing support and peer support groups. Yes, Rachel.
Matt, this is kind of circling back to where you started and then coming back to this post-vention about how parents, some of the language that parents and families might use with their loved ones who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or have an experience with an attempt.
Yeah.
What kind of language to use?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think being a father myself, I know how much I would struggle if I had a child that was reporting these thoughts. And so I think it's important to talk to parents about understanding that they're going to enter their HOT system now, and that they're going to be at the top of their emotional ladder, or at the top of their emotional bucket, whatever imagery you want to use. But inviting them to sort of pan out a little bit, Carl Sagan, Pale Blue Dot perspective, just getting them to really say, okay, we have a situation here and it causes me to feel some type of way, but inviting them to step away from their feelings for a moment to focus on their loved one's feelings. And I think, again, parentally, again, we want to give direction and we want to be authority figure. But in that moment, it's important for us to step out and just to be just to be supportive, ask them, really listen to them and say, okay, I'm hearing you say this, not saying don't say that. I think, no, I want to hear everything that you have to say, and I'm here regardless of what you say. And so please just share. The more parents can encourage their kids to share in open dialogue, the better opportunity we're going to have for those people to come forward in the future, should they have those thoughts in the future. So I think for parents, it's not disconnecting from their emotions completely, but in that moment, just being present for their child in a way that is meaningful and in a way that will invite their children to come to them for support in the future. And this is on many sensitive topics, not just the issue of suicide awareness and prevention. I think it extends to so many different issues. And so I think if we can stick to the two basic questions of what do you need and how can I help, and really just asking those open-ended questions and reflecting back to them what we've heard, I think that's the best approach for parents. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I said I love the two questions that you posed of what do you need? How can I help? And I often add in something like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Someone asked a lovely question, important question about, as a parent, what can we do when children's friends confide in our children about suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, that's a that's a pickle. I know for the kiddos, it's an ethical dilemma. But I do think it's important that we, I guess, proactively teach our children that if a friend does bring this to them, this is what it would look like, and so they can advise in advance. But I don't think that any suicidal statement should go left unaddressed. And so I think if it were one of my children coming to me and one of their friends had made a suicidal statement, I would want to reach out to that kiddo's parents or support that can help get them the support that they need. And so I would personally address that situation directly. And I know that sometimes, again, with rapport and trust, and sometimes it's hard, but really the heart of that, and letting our kids know that the heart of it is that we want to make sure that the people that we care about, the people that we love, remain safe. And that's really the essence of it. They do the same thing in schools and hospitals, and so we do the same. I encourage the same in friendships, and from a parental coaching perspective, I would encourage my kids to let them know, like, hey, like if you're having those thoughts, like we need to get some buy-in and get you some help. And so I think it's important that our kids are aware of that in advance, but in the event that that's already happened, then we have to do what we have to do in order to keep people safe, so that we don't end up losing them to suicide. So that would be my recommendation for that. Support for families and loved ones. Again, there's grief counseling, there's groups like Grief Share, all kinds of really good educational material out there on grief, awareness, if there's a loss, commemorating the life of the person who's lost. I know in some of the things I've heard, it's that we shouldn't stop saying their name. We shouldn't stop telling their story, because really telling the story and commemorating their life and what they meant to you leads to healing. And so it doesn't feel like it in the moment, but ultimately that's what happens over time. So encouraging them to get that support as they need it. And then in the community and workplace, I think this is really important. I know we promote it here a lot, but if we have people in the workplace who have been affected by suicide, that we talk about that we provide things like on-site support if necessary, access to EAPs, and overarchingly just a supportive work environment. I know we do that here, just checking in with each other to see how each other's doing, asking questions. And so I think having promoting it in the community and workplace, because that can be maybe one of the more stressful environments that we have. And so providing that support and wraparound in the workplace is key. Now promote resilience and recovery. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but building emotional resilience is a CBT, DBT approach to care. It needs to be timely and sensitive again. but we need to make sure that we're engaging in the strategies that are most effective, that are evidence-based. And so the role of CBT, just identifying thinking patterns and how thinking impacts the way that we feel and ultimately impacts our behavior. I think people just understanding that basic principles of the cognitive behavioral triangle is really essential to them evaluating their thoughts and where that's coming from, and looking to use evidence to challenge those thoughts. And so mindfulness based in stress reduction, DBT work, mind-body connection, deep breathing exercises, ways to build tolerance. You know, they say that suicide is when pain exceeds one's threshold to cope. And so really important that we're aware of that. Sometimes it feels like an attack, and it's really personal to us, which makes sense. And also with the person that is hurting and recovering, again, avoiding that guilt, shame, and judgment is essential. Developing strong social connections. And so I know it's really more challenging if we have somebody that doesn't have many natural supports in their life. And so putting additional peer supports and professional supports in their network is important while we work on helping them go to places, whether that is a place of faith, or whether that is a social group, or Celebrate Recovery, or an AA or NA, like wherever they can go to develop support networks based on their specific challenges. I think it's important that strong social connections are present in order to promote the recovery and resilience that we're looking for. I am a humanistic existentialist, which means it's just a fancy way of saying I look for the meaning, the purpose, and the function of anything. And so I think if we even look at like Viktor Frankl's work and Man's Search for Meaning, that was a human being who was able to identify the meaning and purpose of going through the Holocaust. And so I think that book is super powerful in terms of exploring meaning and purpose, but really inviting people, like if they're saying something or they're having a thought or they're having this physiological response, that they're going back to what is the meaning, the purpose, and the function of that thing. Certainly going through if there's any issues related to substance use and abuse, that we're getting into that we're talking about those issues and how those contribute to thought patterns and behavioral patterns, even emotional patterns. Promoting self-efficacy and empowerment. Again, encouraging self-advocacy, like I need ... You know, sometimes it's scary to talk about our needs and wants. And so really important that we teach self-efficacy and empowerment through teaching people how to self-advocate and how to foster resilience through education. The more we know, the more equipped we are with information, the better opportunity that we have to not only help ourselves, but potentially help somebody else. And building supportive environments, I think it's about promoting mental health awareness and education. I think we need to talk about this thing more often. I think this should be something that's sort of front and center. If you look at, just watch the news for 5 minutes and you'll find things underlying those situations are mental health concerns, or my preferred reframe is brain health concerns, as Dr. Almen would say. So I think just increasing mental health literacy across the landscape, not just in our offices, but into the community. The more that we can reach the community, the easier these conversations get, the more normalized these conversations become. Really important that we just encourage really open dialogue about this issue. And I think it's also encouraging other people to understand that their story has such immense power. And I think when we're blinded by the darkness with our stories, I think sometimes it's hard to come forward with our story, but I think stories sell, and stories can change lives. And so I think there's great power in those stories. Now the challenge of people coming forward with their stories is oftentimes the stigma. We break stigma through changing the language. We don't say committed suicide anymore. We say died by suicide. And so really important that we just change the language of suicide as to reduce the stigma and making it more possible, or feel more possible, for people to come forward and talk about this thing. Providing safe space. Again, a safe space is a place that's going to be free of guilt, shame, and judgment. I know if we're, there's the threat of hospitalization, I think sometimes that doesn't feel safe, but ultimately the heart of it is safety. And so really important that we provide safe places for people, our loved ones and our clients alike, and community members. We need to engage community leaders. I'm noisy, so I will get out and I will create noise among community leaders. I will involve influential voices. I would encourage us all to do that. The more voices that are writing to our congressmen and women, the more voices that are reaching out to local people of influence, I think is really important. The more noisy we are, the better opportunity we have to change this thing to build more supportive environments for people that are hurting. Community events, again, the Out of Darkness walks, I would go on NAMI's website or AFSP's website to find more details about those walks. I know they have one in December coming up. And so those are really, 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 really cool, from the balloon release to the music to just walking with people that are either commemorating or their loved one, or sort of celebrating their resiliency and coming through an attempt. So really important that we get involved in those community events. We need to establish comprehensive mental health policies. We need to make it easier to access mental health. We need to make regular mental health trainings. I know for me, like, this is like going to webinars and seminars, whether virtual or in person, is super helpful for me. It helps me be a better clinician and it helps me be a better leader. And then suicide prevention training. Again, this is one training, but there's many trainings and there's different ways. The assist model that we talked about earlier, and other suicide prevention techniques. There's trainings for the Columbia Severity Index. There's all kinds of trainings out there. So if you need any of those, feel free to reach out to me. My information is going to be provided. Create supportive organizational culture, lead by example, work-life balance. I know that's something we strongly promote here. We work to live, not live to work. So important that we get that balance correct and find the proper rhythm to our lives. Then evaluate and improve policies. And so if we don't have some of these policies implemented to increase safety and decrease risk, then implementing and improving through evaluation is really important here. Promoting suicide awareness and prevention, regular awareness campaigns, and crisis response plans for mental health emergencies. I think we should all have crisis response plans in our workplaces. Again, we got to learn methods, educate and improve our prevention efforts. We got to set clear objectives. Utilize the data. There's all kinds of data out there on these issues that we can access at our fingertips now. Evaluate outcomes, continuously evaluate quality, engage stakeholders. And so if you're in a workplace and there's stakeholders, like, engage them in the evaluation process. Talk about the areas of opportunity and where we can improve to better support people that are struggling with a challenging time or suicidal ideation or whatever it may be. Emphasize the importance of ongoing education, always be learning. And so really important that we're always learning something. And so the more we read, the more we watch, the more we engage in seminars and online trainings, reading, attending in-person seminars. There's a saying, each one teach one. And so I strongly believe in that. I think all of us can teach each other something new every day. So I would encourage you to do that. Here's a bunch of resources on here. I know they're going to be handing out a PDF version of this, I believe, at the end. And so you get that. And if, again, any of the follow-up questions I need to do more homework on to get you that information, I will work on that. And then this is my information. Dynamics Counseling, we're a small private practice. A couple different locations. We have an office in our psychiatrist office, and then we have several offices in our small office in downtown Mesa. That's me. Again, my name is Matt. I'm a licensed professional counselor. That's my email address. You can feel free to reach out to me anytime. That is my phone number, and that is our website. Peyton is our Chief Operations Officer. She is awesome, and she has all kinds. She's a wealth of information and can provide resources, and she's connective tissue to other outside organizations as well. And that's our phone number and that's our website again. So again, thank you all so much for attending. I'm certainly open for some questions if we have some. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to be respectful of your time, but with that, I will pass it back to Rachel and Debbie.
That was great, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was really wonderful. Someone brought up, and I was thinking, I had some thoughts about this as well, about older adults and how that's often a neglected population with high suicide ideations. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard because when you hear those stories about people that are going through, they're 75, 76, 78, 80, whatever it is. I think that their natural supports in terms of family members and friends, maybe they've passed on. And so I think it's getting them, finding different ways to connect them to community. And so whatever that might look like in terms of providing community. And so maybe that's their faith, or maybe that is an online support group, or just connecting them to different groups in general, I think is the best way that we can support them. I know the individual counseling is incredible for that population. I know they really value that sort of interpersonal direct connection to a provider. And so I think individual counseling, group counseling can also be good for the elderly population. I know those groups are a little bit harder to come by, but there's also those grief share groups that they can go to that they sort of match them up with what sort of issue they're struggling with. And so I know there are groups specifically for the elderly that are struggling with those issues. And so we can get more information in terms of like specific places you could send them, but really any community mental health center, depending on their insurance, and then even private practices across the valley that offer groups for elderly. And so, and then helping them find natural supports, I think is key for them.
Another question. Do you have any comments on what they call suicide by police?
Yeah, so that's something that's really personal to me right now. And so we're working on some issues with that. And so working to get police officers trained in crisis intervention. And so so we can decrease that suicide by police issue. And so I think it's important that we do talk about that, and we do create some uniformed policies and legislation around the ways that police officers respond to mental health crisis calls. And so I think that we do that through creating co-response models, so mental health professionals are involved in these types of calls. And so I think that is super important. But I think the uniformity in the education of police officers for mental health cases, I think is super important. I think that starts at 911. And so I think 911 needs to be informing police officers of what they're going to be encountering so they can go into a call informed. And so I think that would dramatically decrease the amount of suicide by police.
Mm.
More to come on that.
Interesting topic, important. Thank you so much for your expertise and presenting. Your slides were beautiful. I know that Debbie's gonna include those with the certificate. I'm gonna now pass it back to Debbie. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, Matt. This is just, like everybody else, or most people, I have, family members and friends. And so definitely a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Like you said, I feel like the more we talk about it and the more that we, one of my favorite things to say to kids whenever I talk to kids about suicide awareness or is basically, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling. Like, but, do they remember that in the moment? But, we can all try. So thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel, as always, for moderating. You do a great job. I apologize if anyone had any glitches with Zoom. They completely, I guess, updated their platform. I don't know. So I did have a couple emails that people said they were having issues, so they just joined by phone. So I apologize. Hopefully, I don't know. I don't know what happens with technology when it doesn't work. So not my forte, but reminder to everyone, I just have a QR code up there if you want to leave a review for Aurora or for the presentation. It is definitely not required at all. Everyone who registered for the webinar, I just send a CEU certificate to everyone as well as the PDF. If you don't need the CEU certificates, don't use it. But then everyone has the PDF and has your contact information. Thank you so much, because without awesome presenters, we would not be able to offer these CEU webinars. If anyone is out there and you have a master's degree and you're passionate about a topic related to mental health, we are always looking for awesome presenters. Matt, if you have other passions, and we'd always love to have you back to talk about something else.
Of course.
Or I feel like this is a good topic to have a couple times a year as well.
Oh yeah.
So with that being said, it is 1:31, and I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar now. And I hope everyone has an amazing weekend.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate you.
Bye, everyone.